Everyone told me these stones were impossible. Cut by a machine we lost, or by something that was never human. Perfect to the millimetre, identical, scattered across a mountain in Bolivia 13,000 feet up. I've stood beside the H-blocks at Puma Punku, hand flat on the cold grey stone, and they get inside your head. So a team did what nobody had done. They measured every surviving block, printed 157 of them, and laid the whole building on a table. And the answer in those measurements has nothing to do with aliens. We've been reading it wrong for decades. Let me set the scene, because it matters. Puma Punku sits on the Bolivian Altiplano, a high, wind-scoured plain near the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, nearly 13,000 feet above the sea. Up there the air is thin, the sun is punishing, and nothing about that ground says a great city should exist. But one did. Puma Punku is a single piece of Tiwanaku, the capital of a civilization that ran this stretch of the Andes from roughly 500 to 950 CE. And this one building is the piece that stops people cold. You walk up and the first thing you notice is that it's a wreck. Blocks are thrown everywhere, half buried, tipped on their sides, like a giant kicked the whole thing over and wandered off. Then you look closer at the grey stone and the hair on your arms goes up. The corners are crisp. The right angles are clean. Some blocks have a shape carved into the top that looks like a capital H, with deep channels cut straight and square into solid rock. Run a finger along one of those channels and it feels milled, almost machined, like it came out of a factory. And the H-blocks are only the headline act. Look around and you find flat grey slabs carved with sharp rectangular recesses, T-shaped sockets, little raised nubs, and rows of tiny drilled holes spaced out like they came off a jig. Every surface looks deliberate, planned, almost impatient with imperfection. But most people miss this part. Nothing you're looking at is where it's supposed to be. Puma Punku was looted and quarried for parts for 500 years, ever since the Spanish arrived. Of the roughly 150 carved blocks still at the site, not a single one stands in its original position. So for centuries, we had a pile of impossibly precise puzzle pieces, and no idea what the finished puzzle was meant to look like. That gap is where the whole mystery grew. So how do you explain stone cut that cleanly by people with no iron, no steel, and no power tools? For a big slice of the internet, the answer is easy. You don't. You bring in something from outside. The idea has deep roots. In the early 1900s, a Bolivian researcher named Arthur Poznansky studied how Puma Punku lines up with the stars and argued the place was staggeringly old. He didn't mean hundreds of years, or even a few thousand. He put it as far back as 15,000 years, which would make it older than farming, older than the wheel, older than almost everything we think we know about civilization. Then, in 1968, Erich von Däniken published a book called Chariots of the Gods, and he took ruins like this one and asked a very sticky question. What if ancient people didn't build these at all? What if someone came down and helped? From there, it snowballed. By the 2010s, a popular cable series had turned Puma Punku into one of its signature exhibits, replayed for millions. And the pitch never changes. The blocks are identical, cut to tolerances a modern machine shop would envy, fitted so tightly you can't slide a razor blade into the seam. No human hands, the story goes, could pull that off with rocks and rope. And I understand the pull. I really do. When you're standing there with your palm on that stone, the alien answer feels almost reasonable. But I've learned to be careful with explanations that feel good and quietly skip the homework. Nobody had gathered up all the numbers and actually tested the claim in one place, until someone finally did. The problem that stopped everyone is more boring than aliens and a lot more real. The stones are enormous. Some of the andesite blocks at Puma Punku weigh well over 100 tons, and getting them there was brutal. The red sandstone slabs came from a quarry about 6 miles off, which is hard enough on its own. The harder andesite came from far rougher country, roughly 60 miles away near the Copacabana Peninsula, which most likely meant floating multi-ton block across Lake Titicaca on boats built from bundled reeds, then dragging them uphill by hand, with no draft animals big enough to help. You cannot pick these up. You cannot slide them into place to test how they fit. They sit where they fell. On top of that, the site had been measured for a century and a half, but in scraps by different people at different times. A German team led by Alfons Stubel and Max Uli photographed and recorded it back in the 1890s. Decades later, the architectural historian Jean-Pierre Protzen returned and measured the stones in careful detail, so we were never short on data. We had notebooks full of it, heights and widths and lengths, for block after block after block. The trouble is that a wall of raw measurements is almost impossible to picture. You can stare at a column of numbers all day and never once see the building. That was the wall. Too big to move, too scattered to read, too tangled to hold in your head. Everyone who cared about this place slammed straight into it, and it stayed that way until an archaeologist named Alexei Vranich at the University of California, Berkeley, tried something almost childishly simple. He shrank the entire building down to something he could hold in his hands. In 2018, Vranich published his approach in the journal Heritage Science, and honestly, the first time I read it, I laughed, because it's so simple, it feels like cheating. He took every reliable measurement anyone had ever recorded at Puma Punku, the old German notes, Protzen's detailed survey, all of it, and fed those dimensions into a computer to build digital models of the blocks. Each block went from field notes to a digital model to a check that made sure the shape was watertight and solid. Then came the move that changes everything. He sent them to a 3D printer and printed them as solid little miniatures, at 4% of their real size, small enough to sit in your palm. His team modelled 140 pieces of andesite and 17 slabs of sandstone, 157 tiny stones. And then they did exactly what you do with a fresh box of Lego on the living room floor. They started fitting them together. Vranich said it flat out. This was a step backward from the fancy on-screen computer models everyone had been using. And it worked better anyway, because the human brain is still sharper than any software at grabbing an odd-shaped object, turning it over and feeling where it belongs. Software just can't match that yet. Hand a person the actual object and they'll pick up 2 blocks, rotate them, and feel the click the moment the shapes lock. He described the pile, before they cracked it, as looking like an elaborate Lego set. And piece by piece, that Lego set turned back into a building nobody had seen whole in half a millennium. And this is the part I really want you to hear, because what those little printed blocks revealed about the H-block measurements is where the whole legend comes apart. So what did they find when the building came back together? This is where the alien story quietly falls apart, and nobody had to set out to debunk anything. The numbers did it on their own. Start with the claim at the dead centre of the myth that the blocks are identical, stamped to the same measurement like factory parts. When you actually run a caliper across the H-blocks and compare them, that turns out to be false. No 2 of them match. They're close and they're obviously built to a shared plan, but each one carries small differences, the kind of variation you get from skilled people cutting hard stone by hand. That block-to-block wobble is the fingerprint of human hands. A machine stamping copies wouldn't leave it. What the reconstruction showed instead was something better. The blocks fall into families. Groups of stones that share the same core dimensions and the same design, repeated across the building on purpose. Think standardized parts in a kit. The doorway pieces follow one template. The H-blocks follow their own. Change the size of one block and a matching notch on its neighbour changes to fit it. That is coordination, planned across dozens of separate stones. Once Vranich spread the miniatures across the table, You could see at a glance which shapes repeated and which ones stood alone, and that repetition is the signature of a plan. So sit with what that means, because it turns the mystery inside out. It's not the trace of a machine, it's the trace of a master design. People standardizing their components and cutting to a spec more than 1,000 years before anyone ever sold a flat-pack shelf. And this is the part that gets me. That answer is more impressive than the alien one, and it almost never gets told. If you'd take the measured truth over the mystery they sell on late-night TV, go ahead and subscribe, because this channel runs on exactly this kind of puzzle. Alright, but if it wasn't machines, you've still got a fair question. How do you cut hard volcanic rock into crisp right angles with nothing but Stone Age tools? For years, that was the strongest card the mystery crowd held. Then 2 archaeologists at Berkeley basically called the bluff by doing the work themselves. Jean-Pierre Protzen and Stella Nair spent years studying how Tiwanaku and Inca stone was actually shaped, and a lot of that meant picking up rocks and trying it. The key that unlocks it is hardness. The famous blocks are andesite, and andesite sits around 5.5 to 6 on the hardness scale. That sounds tough, and it is. But several stones the Tiwanaku had lying around are harder still. Quartzite comes in near 7, so does flint. Agate lands around 6.5 to 7. Shape a softer stone with a harder one, and the harder one wins. Nair didn't just argue this on paper. She sat down and cut andesite with those stone tools herself, and it worked. Slow, clean edges from a rock and a steady hand. You can do it, but it is punishing. The drill holes work the same way. Those perfectly round bores people hold up as impossible. Protzen tested it with a bow drill and sand as an abrasive, a setup available for thousands of years, and it grinds through stone at maybe a few millimeters an hour. One hole is an afternoon of patient work. Multiply that by an entire building, and you're looking at years of grinding labor by a large, organized workforce. Slow, yes, but well within reach of a coordinated society. And you find the same drilling and the same joinery at other Andean sites like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo, which is the last thing you'd expect if the technique had dropped out of the sky at one spot. Then there's the H-channel itself, the shape that gave these blocks their name. Its job was mechanical. The Tiwanaku poured molten copper and arsenic bronze straight into those channels, casting metal clamps right there in place to lock one block to the next. Metallurgists have since studied those clamps, and they're a deliberate copper-arsenic alloy, mixed and cast to a recipe. That is a real metal industry, running at almost 13,000 feet. So that H-channel, the shape that launched 1,000 alien theories, was really just a slot to hold a metal clamp. Now put the pieces together, and a picture of how this building actually worked starts to surface. You've got standardized blocks in repeating families. You've got metal clamps cast in place to bind them. Add that up, and you get a structure designed to be assembled, taken apart, and assembled again. Interlocking, modular, held together with brackets. If that sounds familiar, it should. It's the basic logic of prefabricated construction, worked out in solid stone, on a mountain in Bolivia, around 1,500 years ago. The reconstruction points to a terraced platform faced in that fine stone, with a sunken court cut into the top, and gateways framing the path through it. Layered, deliberate, sacred architecture hiding under the rubble we see today. And when Vranich fit the miniatures together, the building gave up one more secret, and it's the detail that haunts me most. Scattered around the site are the shattered remains of doorways, carved at different sizes. On the table, those doorways lined up, set in sequence, largest to smallest and framed just so, they create an optical effect. They give you the impression that you're staring down a corridor that runs on forever into infinity, when in truth, you're looking into one small room. Sit with that for a second, that alignment, was no accident. Somebody engineered an illusion into the architecture, a deliberate trick of depth meant for a person standing in exactly the right spot. And that fits everything we know about this place. Tiwanaku carried enormous religious weight for the peoples of the Andes. The Inca, who came along later, believed it was the exact spot where the world was created. And honestly, for the birthplace of the world, a doorway that seems to open onto forever feels like precisely the right thing to build. So where does all this leave us, standing in front of these stones? For me, it lands somewhere far stranger than where the mystery began. Strip away the ancient astronauts and the 15,000-year-old dates that radiocarbon has thoroughly buried, and what's left is harder to believe than the myth ever was. A people living at nearly 13,000 feet, around 536 CE, with no iron and no wheel worth the name, quarried 100-ton stones, dragged them for miles, shaped them with harder rock into standardized, interlocking parts, bound them with cast bronze and engineered an illusion of infinity into a doorway. Then the whole thing was so thoroughly torn apart over 500 years that the only way we could finally see the plan again was to shrink it to 4% and rebuild it by hand, like a model kit on a table. That's the piece I can't put down. We didn't need a spaceship to explain Puma Punku. We needed a 3D printer and the patience to treat those people as the engineers they actually were. But here's where I'll leave you, because the honest truth is that we are not done. Only about 150 blocks survived, none of them where they belong. And Vranich's reconstruction is one strong, informed reading of how they fit, not the last word carved in stone. Pieces are still missing. Museums hold loose fragments. Nearby colonial churches were built partly from Tiwanaku stone, hauled off and repurposed centuries ago. The blueprint is scattered across an entire country, waiting for someone to gather it back up. And when those pieces surface, the H-blocks may have one more thing left to say. I've got a theory about what this building was actually for. That's the next dig. I'll see you there.